August 30th, 1944. Nazi-occupied Slovenia. 7 men crouch in a ditch 60 meters beyond the barbed wire of Stalag 306. For 3 years, not a single prisoner has escaped this camp alive. These 7 just did. Ralph Churches, a 25-year-old Australian, should be sprinting toward the partisan rendezvous. Instead, he stands frozen, staring back at the watchtowers. In his pocket, a photograph of his wife Ronte, creased from 3 years of handling. On the back, her handwriting, "Come home to me." What happens next becomes the largest successful prisoner of war escape of World War II. More prisoners freed than the Great Escape. More men were brought home alive, and almost nobody has heard of it. Why did a bank clerk reject freedom? And how did he pull off the impossible? May 1941, the Greek coastline. Allied forces are collapsing under the weight of the Nazi blitzkrieg, entire divisions retreating in confusion as German aircraft dominate the sky. Ralph Churches, a 22-year-old bank teller from Adelaide who enlisted just 8 months earlier, stands on a narrow strip of beach with 6 other Australians and watches the last evacuation ship disappear over the horizon. Its silhouette shrinks, then vanishes into smoke and distance. Around them, trucks burn where they were abandoned, ammunition cooks off with dull pops, and the sea offers no mercy. They have been left behind. The 7 men find a rotting fishing dinghy half buried in sand, its hull split and worm-eaten. They patch the holes with rags torn from uniforms, caulk the seams with tar scraped from wreckage, and shove it into the water under cover of darkness. Crete lies nearly 100 kilometers away, across open Aegean water patrolled by German aircraft and naval units. For 2 weeks, they row by night and hide by day, dragging the boat into sea caves and coves. They drink rainwater collected in helmets, chew raw fish, and ration hope as carefully as food. On the 15th day, exhaustion hollowing their faces, a German patrol boat intercepts them just 3 kilometers from Crete. Rifles are raised, orders are barked. The war ends for Ralph Churches before he ever fires a single shot. The Germans pack their prisoners into cattle cars bound north. There is no water, no sanitation, no room to sit or lie down. For 6 days, the train crawls through Europe while men faint from dehydration and heat. When someone collapses and does not get up, guards drag the body to the door and throw it onto the tracks without slowing. By the time the survivors stumble out at Maribor, in occupied Slovenia, nearly 1 in 10 of Ralph's fellow prisoners has died from the transport alone. The rest look decades older. Stalag 306 exists for a single purpose: repairing the rail lines Allied bombers keep destroying. Every morning at 0600, guards march prisoners to work sites at gunpoint. 12 hours hauling steel rails, filling craters, hacking frozen earth with broken tools. Every evening, survivors drag themselves back through the gates to receive 200 grams of black bread, less than half what a man needs to survive. Within 6 weeks, Ralph can count his own ribs. But the horror that keeps Ralph awake is not his own starvation. Through the wire of the neighboring compound, he watches hundreds of Soviet prisoners standing in the mud. The Germans consider Slavic prisoners unworthy of even the pretense of labor. They are being deliberately starved. Ralph watches those men turn into skeletons. He watches them drop, one by one, into the mud and not get up. In 14 months, Ralph Churches will stand at that barbed wire fence, free, with a choice that will define him. But first, he has to become someone capable of making it. Ralph has one weapon against despair: his brain. Languages come easily to him. If he can learn German, he can make himself useful. Useful prisoners sometimes survive. A Slovenian farm boy delivers vegetables to the camp twice a week. The boy cannot read. Ralph bribes him with cigarette rations to smuggle in German newspapers. Then Ralph teaches the boy to recognize letters through pantomime, acting out the headlines, until both can stumble through a sentence. One night, a guard catches Ralph with a folded newspaper hidden inside his mattress. Ralph's heart nearly stops. Discovery means solitary confinement, beatings, possibly death. But the guard only glances at the headline, snorts, and moves on. He assumes the Australian is saving it for toilet paper, nothing more. Ralph lies awake for hours afterward, breathing slowly, the paper still pressed against his ribs, knowing how close he came to disappearing. Night after night, Ralph whispers German vocabulary in the dark of the barracks, mouthing words until they slip into his dreams. He listens, repeats, memorizes. Within 4 months, the Australian bank clerk can hold real conversations with his captors, answering questions, understanding jokes, catching threats before they are spoken aloud. The camp commandant notices. Impressed by an English speaker who learned German faster than most university students, he appoints Ralph the official camp interpreter. The prisoners elect him their spokesman, the Vertrauensmann. Suddenly, Ralph stands in the commandant's office negotiating for extra rations, arguing to keep sick men off work details, and later burying those he cannot save. The Germans call him Herr Churches. The Australians call him something else. In Adelaide slang, a South Australian is a crow eater, and Ralph is the only South Australian in the camp. While the crow smiles and translates, the question lingers. What is he planning behind the commandant's back? And how does a prisoner begin building an escape network under the eyes of armed guards? By 1943, Ralph had buried 47 men. He wrote each name and serial number in a small notebook, careful handwriting arranged in neat columns, as if he were recording a debt rather than the dead. Every entry hardened his conviction that waiting for liberation was not patience but surrender. The Allies were winning the war, yes, but winning it slowly. At the current mortality rate, half the camp would be dead before any Allied soldier ever reached Slovenia. Ralph tried twice to escape on his own. The first time, he hid inside a supply truck, wedged beneath sacks of potatoes, and managed to ride nearly 2 kilometers before a guard noticed movement and dragged him out at gunpoint. The second time, he crawled under a loose section of fence and reached 5 kilometers into the forest before dogs picked up his scent and led a patrol straight to him. Each failure brought the same punishment: 7 days in a concrete cell without light, half rations of bread and water, and a beating that left bruises blooming across his body for weeks. But pain was not what stopped Ralph from trying again. Arithmetic did. A lone escapee in Nazi-occupied Yugoslavia, without papers, contacts, or maps, had a survival window measured in hours. Patrols were too dense, borders too distant. Alone, escape was not bravery. It was simply a slower form of suicide. Everything changed in late 1943, when a new prisoner arrived. Freddie Russell, a New Zealander, carries a secret that changes everything. Freddie was captured only weeks ago. Before his capture, he fought alongside the Yugoslav partisans, the guerrilla resistance, waging a shadow war against the Nazis for 2 years. Freddie knows things: hidden trails through the mountains, coded signals to contact partisan cells, the location of a secret airstrip where Allied planes land at night to evacuate fugitives. But Freddie's information comes with a problem. The escape routes exist, but they require resources prisoners do not have: guides, food, safe houses, and above all, trust. The partisans will not risk their networks for random escapees stumbling through the woods. Ralph realizes he must make contact before any escape attempt, not after. He must build the pipeline first, then fill it with men. Over the next 8 months, Ralph constructed an underground network far more complex than anything the Germans imagined possible. Using his position as interpreter, he moved beyond the wire with relative freedom, escorting work details, accompanying sick prisoners to doctors in town, translating paperwork no one bothered to double-check. On these trips, he began leaving coded messages at specific drop points Freddie had identified. A blacksmith in Maribor agreed to forge identity papers. A farmer 10 kilometers south would hide escapees in his barn. A priest quietly relayed messages through his parish. Link by link, Ralph assembled a fragile chain stretching from the camp gates to an Allied airstrip 160 kilometers away. In 6 weeks, Ralph Churches will lead 103 men across those mountains. But which 3 will he lose along the way? And what will it cost him to kneel beside a dying man he promised to save? By August 1944, the pipeline was ready. Ralph selected 6 men for the first escape: Freddie Russell, a British sergeant named Tom Price, and 4 others chosen for their health, discipline, and endurance. On the night of August 29th, they cut through the wire with shears smuggled in by the camp blacksmith and vanished into the forest. By dawn, they reached the first partisan checkpoint. The system worked. Ralph Churches had done the impossible. He had escaped Stalag 306. Now he stood at the edge of the forest, free at last, with a route home carefully mapped before him. The partisans urged him forward, and every calculation, logical, statistical, rational, pointed in the same direction: go. But behind him, beyond the wire, more than 100 men were still waiting. After 3 years of planning this escape, could he really walk away? And if he turned back, What kind of man would willingly return to a place built to kill him? Ralph Churches tells the partisans he is going back. The guerrilla commander stares at him in disbelief. Back into the camp, back through the wire he has just cut, back into a system designed to erase men. They warn him there will be no second chance. If he is caught, he will be shot, not imprisoned, not beaten, executed. German reprisals have already begun in response to partisan activity, and any escaped prisoner recaptured in the zone will be classified as a saboteur and dealt with accordingly. Ralph listens without arguing. He thanks them, turns, and disappears into the forest. He reaches the perimeter of Stalag 306 before dawn and waits in the trees, counting steps, shadows, and seconds. He knows the patrol rotation by heart, memorized over 3 years of captivity. At 0300 hours, a 30-second gap opens between guards. Ralph crawls through the cut in the wire, sprints across the open ground, and slides through the barracks door, rolling into the darkness as if he had never left. No one suspects he spent the night with armed partisans. By morning, he is back in his role as interpreter, translating orders, answering questions, maintaining the illusion of obedience. Inside, everything has changed. He is playing a double game now, more dangerous than anything he has attempted before. By night, he moves through the barracks and whispers, identifying men who can be trusted, men who can keep secrets, men who will not break under pressure. Over the next 6 weeks, the plan takes shape. Ralph organizes prisoners into groups of 12, each assigned a departure window and a guide waiting at the first checkpoint. He distributes forged papers, civilian clothes smuggled piece by piece, and crude maps drawn from Freddy's intelligence, while the partisans position food caches along the route. The timing must be exact. Once the first group escapes, the Germans will know something is wrong. Every group after that will face tighter security, more patrols, greater risk. There will be no margin for error. October 10th, 1944. The first group cuts through the wire at midnight and vanishes into the dark. 24 hours later, the second follows. Then the third. By October 13th, nearly 50 men have slipped out of Stalag 306, and the Germans still haven't noticed. Daily headcounts remain correct because Ralph manipulates the records, marking escaped men as transferred or hospitalized in town. On October 15th, a German officer conducts a surprise inspection and realizes a quarter of the camp has vanished. The alarm is raised. Search parties flood the forest, dogs straining at their leashes. For the prisoners still inside the wire, the window seems to have slammed shut, but hidden in the camp latrine, wrapped in oilcloth, is a second set of wire cutters. Ralph has scouted an alternate route, a drainage culvert beneath the eastern fence, emptying into a creek bed. That night, while Germans search west, Ralph leads the remaining men east. 47 prisoners crawl through the culvert, wade through waist-deep water, and emerge beyond the perimeter. 103 escaped prisoners are now scattered across the Slovenian mountains, moving in small groups toward a rendezvous point none of them have ever seen. Between them and freedom lie 160 kilometers of enemy territory, snow-choked passes, roaming German patrols, and a ticking clock. How long could he keep deceiving the Germans before someone noticed the pattern? And when they did, would his choice to go back condemn him? Or everyone still trapped behind the wire? October 16th, 1944. The march begins. At first light, Ralph organizes the escapees into columns of 20, each one assigned to a partisan guide who knows the mountains by memory rather than maps. The men look nothing like soldiers now. They wear a patchwork of civilian coats, stolen German uniforms turned inside out, scarves fashioned from torn blankets. Some have boots taken from farmhouses or dead soldiers. Many have nothing but rags wrapped around their feet and tied with wire. What they carry is barely enough. Hard bread already growing mold, raw potatoes dug from fields, a few tins of meat meant to feed 100 men for 2 weeks. No one complains. Complaints require energy, and energy is the one thing they no longer have. For the first 3 days, the plan seems blessed by luck. The partisans guide them along goat trails and logging paths the Germans ignore. Patrols search west while the columns move east. They travel by night, covering nearly 15 kilometers at a time, and hide by day in barns, caves, and abandoned shepherd huts. Men who have not smiled in years begin joking quietly about food, eggs, bread with butter, real coffee, small fantasies that keep their legs moving. For a moment, it feels possible that all of them might make it. Then the weather turns. A blizzard sweeps down from the Alps. Temperatures plunge below freezing. Snow buries the trails, and the column slows to a crawl. Men weakened by years of malnutrition begin collapsing. Ralph moves up and down the line, pulling men to their feet, redistributing loads, forcing those who want to lie down to keep walking. He knows anyone who stops will freeze to death within hours. For a single hour on the second night of the blizzard, Ralph considers turning back. The cold has seeped into his bones. His lungs burn with every breath, and behind him men are stumbling, falling, crying out in the dark. He thinks of Ronte's photograph in his pocket. He could slip away, find a farmhouse, and wait for spring. Then the British sergeant sits down on a rock and refuses to go further. His feet are black with frostbite. He tells Ralph to leave him. Instead, Ralph organizes a rotation of men to carry Webb on their backs, passing him from shoulder to shoulder through the snow. They carry him for 16 kilometers. On October 22nd, a New Zealand private named Arthur Simmons collapses and cannot be revived. His heart has simply stopped, worn out by cold and starvation. Ralph kneels beside the body, places a hand on Simmons's chest, finds nothing, and closes the man's eyes. There is no time to bury him. The column must keep moving. Ralph pulls out his camp notebook and writes Arthur Simmons's name and serial number. Another debt, another name. The partisans guide the column over the Pohorje mountain range, through passes so narrow the men must walk single file. German patrols crisscross the valleys below. Twice the escapees hear engines and dive into snowbanks to hide. Once a patrol passes within 50 meters. Ralph presses his face into the snow until his cheeks burn. The Germans move on without seeing them. By October 28th, the column reaches the Sava River, swollen with autumn rains. The only bridge is guarded by a German checkpoint, making it impossible to move 100 men across unseen. The partisans propose a night crossing at a ford 3 kilometers upstream. The water is shallow but fast, chest deep and freezing. Ralph asks for volunteers. 12 men step forward, link arms, and enter the river. The current nearly sweeps them away, but they reach the far bank. One by one, the rest follow in groups of 8. The crossing takes 4 hours. Every man makes it across, though several must be carried afterward, their legs numb and useless. 2 more men will not reach the airstrip. David Finch, a British corporal, falls from a cliff path in the dark. George Murray, an Australian private, succumbs to pneumonia on the final night. On November 1st, 1944, the column reaches the rendezvous point, a hidden airstrip in liberated partisan territory, a flat meadow ringed by mountains. 5 Dakota transport planes wait on the grass, engines cold, the pilots watching the sky for German fighters. Ralph counts his men. 3 deaths out of 103 crossing 160 kilometers of enemy territory in winter, a miracle and a tragedy compressed into the same number. As the men line up to board, 3 step out of formation. They are staying to fight alongside the partisans who saved them. Ralph studies them, then nods, shakes each man's hand, and turns back toward the aircraft. He understands. Some debts can only be paid in person. How many more men would the mountains claim before the journey ended? And at what point does perseverance become indistinguishable from sacrifice? The Dakotas lift off at 2:30 a.m., climbing through mountain darkness toward Italy. Ralph sits on the cold metal floor, pressed between 2 men too exhausted to speak. Through the open door, he watches the fires of the partisan camp shrink to pinpricks, then disappear. Somewhere down there, 3 of his men are picking up rifles. Somewhere down there, 3 bodies lie in shallow graves the spring thaw will erase. 4 hours later, the planes touch down at Bari, Italy. When the doors open, Allied medics stare in disbelief at what emerges. 100 gaunt, bearded, hollow-eyed men in rags, some weeping, some laughing, all of them alive. British intelligence debriefs Ralph for 3 days, demanding every detail, partisan contacts, escape routes, safe houses. Then they hand him a document to sign. Ralph's escape must remain classified. The partisan networks are still operating, still smuggling agents and fugitives out of occupied Europe. If the Germans learn how the escape worked, the pipeline will be destroyed, along with everyone connected to it. In November 1944, Ralph Churches walks through the front door of his Adelaide home for the first time in 4 years. His wife Ronte does not recognize him at first. He weighs 58 kilograms, 40 less than when he left, his hair gone gray at the temples. The army awards him the British Empire Medal in a quiet ceremony. No press, no photographs. He returns to work as a bank clerk, then moves into insurance. When neighbors ask about the war, he says only that he was a prisoner for a while. Nothing much to tell. In 1963, The Great Escape premieres to worldwide acclaim. Ralph watches it in a dark Adelaide theater. Steve McQueen on a motorcycle, tunnels dug with spoons, a stirring march to freedom. The real Great Escape of March 1944 freed 76 men from Stalag Luft 3. 50 were recaptured and executed. Only 3 made it home. 5 months later, Ralph led 103 men across 160 kilometers of enemy territory and brought 100 of them back alive. His escape was larger, safer, more successful, and classified. So his escape did not exist. The credits roll. The lights come up. Ralph walks out of the theater alone. For 40 years, Ralph keeps his silence. He raises children, sings in his church choir, attends Anzac Day services, and listens to other men's stories. In 1985, the British government finally lifts the secrecy order. Ralph publishes a memoir, 100 Miles as the Crow Flies. A few documentaries follow, but there are no blockbuster films, no Steve McQueen, no motorcycle chase. History had already chosen its heroes, and Ralph's name was not among them. Ralph Churches died in 2014 at the age of 96. In Slovenia, the route he walked is now called the Crow's Flight, and hikers follow his footsteps through the mountains. The partisans who helped him are honored in museums. He did not go back for fame. He lived most of his life in anonymity. He did not go back for medals. He could not even mention his medal for 40 years. He did not go back because he was ordered to, or because he calculated the odds. Ralph Churches went back because he could not live with himself if he did not. Standing at the edge of that forest, freedom tasted like betrayal. The weight of 100 abandoned men would have crushed him more surely than any German bullet. 100 families received husbands, fathers, and sons instead of telegrams. 100 men grew old and told their grandchildren about the Australian who came back for them. And one bank clerk from Adelaide spent the rest of his life knowing he had done everything a human being can do for the people who depended on him. Ralph's escape was one of many during World War II. Another daring escape happened 20 years later in Berlin when 2 university students dug a 145-meter tunnel beneath the Berlin Wall. 57 people crawled to freedom while a border guard died in the crossfire. If you want to see how the greatest escape in Berlin Wall history unfolded, check out the next video on Tunnel 57.